Yes, for sure.
Okay, my name is Tyson. I'm the cotton and small grain specialist with the University of Tennessee. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we have come to know from barley production within the state. So I started in 2014. Most of my focus in a small grains appointment would be on, I'm going to wreak havoc on you walking around. Most of my focus has been on small grains, wheat, winter wheat, right? That's where we have 300 to 400,000 acres every year. But started getting questions on barley really right after I started. Probably in 15 would have been the first one. Just testing the market. What might production look like here? I think for those that are interested in maybe going into barley, I think the first step is going to be, let's look at where it's typically produced and the characteristics of those regions. And if we can understand why they're there, maybe we can pull that down into our region, at least have an understanding of where some pinch points might be, some challenges we might have with southeastern production. Then I'm going to talk about a basic agronomic approach. All right, so, and this is going to be a conglomerate of what most other states in the southeast have found. Ohio's done a tremendous amount of work, Kentucky, North Carolina. These are states that their university systems have put some type of a recommendation together on pulling that wheat grower, that winter wheat grower into winter barley production. I'm going to fine-tune those a little bit, but I'm hopeful that in the conversations we'll have, not only in my presentation, but this afternoon we have that panel, we can refine these starting points even more. And then the last thing I'm going to point out are some variety testing results. So the Agri Center, Bruce Kirksey over at the Memphis Agri Center, has been testing since 17, I think. He's been running a winter malt barley trial. That includes, and we'll get into it, but it includes a number of known varieties and a significant number of experimental varieties from some of these breeding programs. Ohio's got a breeder, I know, several other breeders that are putting forth effort into developing a malting barley for winter production, not spring production. While I was looking for information about recommendations and guidelines, I came across this publication. This was from 1910, Barley Culture in the Southern States. Barley is not a new commodity to the South. We've had a long history of trying to grow barley, typically in the winter period. Tennessee, actually, this was about 1910. Did not expect for the trajectory to be this small, but 1,000 acres grown in Tennessee in 1910. But history throughout all the southeastern states, most of the southeastern states, more southern than Tennessee, the acreage was small enough they didn't even have record of it in the early teens. But long history of trying to grow barley in the region. I want to start by looking at winter wheat production in the U.S. Right, so 68% of all wheat production within the U.S. is going to be winter wheat production. And if you look at the regions, we've got a significant amount North Carolina, Virginia, down through Tennessee, a little bit down through the Delta, significant amount in the I-states, but the majority of what we have is going to be right here in the center of the U.S., right? Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota. We've got a little in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana. If you think about winter production, we do have some in the drier, more arid, cool regions, but we're going to have a big concentration here in the middle of the U.S. Now let's shift gears and look at spring wheat production. North Dakota makes up 51% of all the U.S. wheat production in the spring. 32% of all the wheat we produce is actually spring production. All right, now I'm going to flip to barley now. So here's a spring map. The darker green is going to represent higher concentration of acres. Here's barley production, right? There's one real reason I wanted to show this. 87% of the barley that's going to be produced in the U.S. is going to be spring production. And where is that? It's going to be in these regions that are typically more arid. They're going to be cooler. They're not going to have rainfall during heading. And those are going to be some real challenges for us as we start to pull in this fall, this winter barley production. All right, 13% of all the barley produced in the U.S. is going to be in that fall period, right? So we already know this is a natural migration. We've seen barley move in the earth. We had history in 1910 of growers trying to grow it in this region. We've seen it migrate into more arid regions, cooler regions, and migrate into that spring production system, not the winter. Not to say it can't happen. We got some production challenges. There are two main challenges that I want to talk about today, and I think both of these can be managed, but from a risk standpoint, they are significant, and this is likely the most significant one. Who in here is producing wheat now? All right, have y'all had issues over the past couple of years with freeze? Sporadic?
Yeah, sporadic. Nothing significant.
So we've had a couple of scenarios, a couple of years, and typically it's not going to be in that December, January time frame. It's going to be that late freeze we have right when that head's in boot, the growing point's above ground, right? Fortunately, we've not had catastrophic loss, but I have walked severe yield penalties, and a lot of times it's going to be when we plant on the very front end of that planting window, and that head's emerged a little earlier than we prefer it would. All right, this is a known relationship of wheat resistance to freeze injury. Our maximum resistance time frame falls right here between December and February. This is going to be when that growing point is below ground. After that growing point leaves the ground and begins to move up that boot, that's when we see the most sensitivity to freeze. And this is where I've had issues with some of my growers where we've been bit, right? That head's moving up, we get a freeze, it damages the growing point, and we can't overcome that. We've got to retiller if we're going to make another grain head. Barley is more sensitive, and it's more sensitive in this period of maximum resistance to freeze injury, and it's going to head a little bit earlier, typically 2 to 3 weeks. So what we're basically doing when we're thinking about producing barley, if we were to alter this graph, and this is just theoretical, I don't have data for this, we're going to shift that maximum resistance up, and we're going to shift that heading over. These two represent major challenges. And if you look at the production guys in Ohio, in the Carolinas, most of the time they're going to rate winter survivability. This is why, right? If we're planting barley and we don't get established well in that right after that Hessian fly free date, we may have issues with this maximum resistance period. And if we begin to head too early, we can see those heads being aborted from that cold as well. Big challenge. We can manage against that somewhat, but it is a big challenge. The other thing I want to mention is obviously rainfall. And rainfall hits us in two big ways. The first is going to be disease. You see our head blight is going to be the number one that I would be most concerned with. Rainfall during heading, moist conditions up to heading, rainfall during heading, and then rainfall after heading can lead to problems not only with disease but also sprouting. And again, think about the production region more north from here. During that heading time frame, they're going to deal with the same levels of rainfall that we typically have in the more humid southeast and south. Two challenges that we really need to consider. All right, the good news is agronomically, this is a small grain, and it's relatively easy. If we know how to manage for high yield wheat, we can take those same principles and generally speaking apply those to barley. I'm going to present a little bit of the data we have from wheat, and then I'm going to try to amend that a little bit for considering what you might want to do when you're thinking about barley. From a pre-plant standpoint, a lot of the recommendations, a lot of the guides that I've seen basically say do not plant after corn. From a disease management standpoint, you'd be far better off following soybeans. Just do not plant after corn. If you do choose to plant after corn, you need to make sure that you've got all that residue broken up and buried if possible. We're a no-till state. Barley may not be the best crop after corn to try to go in from a no-till standpoint. All right. From a variety selection standpoint, I'll talk a little bit about this here in a minute. We've got some resources there. Weed control is going to be very similar. Some of the data some data would say that barley can be more tolerant of some of the herbicides we've been using than some varieties of wheat. Make sure you're going to read your label. A lot of the same chemicals are going to move across from barley to winter wheat. From a planting standpoint, our fly-free day is October 15th. I am very concerned about trying to get that seedling established well enough to overwinter. So I want to get it out right at that Hessian fly free day, October 15th. I would rather honestly be at October 10th than October 20th. I want to make sure I've got sufficient growth to get through that winter period. The risk of planting in September would be that head coming up later in the spring and then getting hit by one of those Easter freezes, okay, or cold snaps. One thing that we can do here from a planting standpoint, and you got to be careful, but we're typically planting our wheat 1 inch to 1.5 inches. I would go slightly deeper with barley, just slightly. If you've got high quality seed, I think you'll be able to make a stand if you target that 1.25 inches. Think about where your growing point is going to be, your seminal root system. If you're a little deeper, we're going to be a little bit more buffered from a cold snap during that December to February standpoint. Okay. From a fertility standpoint, pH obviously going to be very similar to what we would do with wheat. Phosphorus, potassium, exactly the same. Nitrogen is going to be where we're going to change things. Okay, so we've seen a trend in Tennessee. We can typically go 120, 130, 140 units of nitrogen and really push that wheat yield, break 100 bushels. In that high yield environment, it may be beneficial to push nitrogen rate over 130 pounds. That's not going to be the case with barley, right? Because the relationship of protein content with nitrogen rate is very consistent. We want our protein content less than 12%, right? So if we start pushing nitrogen rate above 75 pounds, and when I say 75 pounds, I really mean total nitrogen, we can start to risk getting into that high protein level, and that's going to really decrease the value of that malting barley. 75 pounds total. So a lot of these variety trials, when they're running these trials, they're only top dressing with 60 pounds of nitrogen. They're assuming they've got about 15 pounds already in the profile. If we're following soybeans, you don't need a fall application at all. You can watch tiller number in the spring. 60 pounds during green up should be more than enough to get us into that 11-ish protein range and not get us over into that 13 plus. Now, and there's going to be a balance there, but 75 pounds has been where most of the recommendations typically fall. I'll mention this because it's become more of an issue when we have these warmer falls. If we get good establishment of our wheat, we've seen aphids transmit barley yellow dwarf relatively early in our wheat crop. I would definitely scout barley if planted on that or slightly before that Hessian fly free day. I would definitely scout for aphids. You want to make sure those aphids are not present. I'm not worried about the damage the aphids do, but I am worried about barley yellow dwarf getting into that crop, vectored by that aphid. If it's a warm fall, that's when we're going to be most susceptible to those infestations. May be able to get away with just one treatment in that warm fall. Probably best to check again at green up. These are really inexpensive pests to manage. You're talking about $1 or $2 an acre. That's it. So, but not something I would overlook. And from a disease standpoint, and I'll talk a little bit about this here in a minute, but I would budget 2 applications of the fungicide, and I would not cut on a fungicide. I would look at Mirabis Ace. That's been one of the best performing fungicides we have in wheat. It has been, from the conversations I've had with those that are looking at barley in Tennessee, it's been a very consistent performer. You want to make sure you get it out right after that head emerges, and potentially again. We're going to protect the flag leaf. I'm not worried about the flag leaf that much. I think it'll be very similar to what we would see in wheat. You may have rust occasionally. Some of the standard foliar diseases are also going to be a problem in barley. But really, I'm really worried about Fusarium head blight, protection of that head after it emerges. All right, so I'm going to try to recap some of those nuances here. we're going to plant immediately after that fly-free date to get sufficient growth to overwinter. We need to target, I didn't talk about seeding rate. One thing, we typically see seeding rate recommendations anywhere from 1 million to 1.4 million. Occasionally you'll see a publication 1.2 to 1.5. I would try to go a little low. And the main reason for that is I don't want that canopy to be too terribly dense. If we do have a really dense canopy, we could need even another fungicide application, and we're already budgeting for 2. Make sure you're looking at a total nitrogen rate of 75 pounds. This is going to be the single biggest difference between a wheat management and a barley management. In my mind, is going to be properly managing nitrogen, and considering what crop we're following. Just generally speaking, do not follow corn. There may be some guys in here that have already tried it and had success following corn. That's great. And if you're just trying to get in it and you're not planting the entire farm to it, which I hope you're not, if you're looking at 50 acres, then it ought to be pretty easy to find a well-drained 50 acres that was following beans. That would be a great place to explore it. And again, plan on 1 to 2 shots of a fungicide. You can watch some of these Fusarium head blight predictors, but my recommendation would be budget for it. You'd be better off spraying for it than not, and potential for DON levels in barley are relatively high. I want to very briefly highlight some of the research results that Kirksey's generated, Dr. Kirksey out of Memphis Agri Center. More than dive too much into his specific results, I want to highlight a website that is a repository for all of these winter malting barley variety trial results. And that you can access online. It not only provides the commercial varieties that are easily available, but it also provides information on the experimentals, the breeding lines that are coming forward. Kirksey's been doing this since 2016. He's been running the actual national winter malting barley trial since 2017. I tried to run a strip trial in Jackson in 2017 in my location, winter killed. And he actually has, he 2 of the varieties that he planted also winter killed at 50%. Harvested this in June. Again, you're going to typically see this come off about 2 weeks quicker than wheat. You need to make sure that as soon as it is ready, you get it out. We do not want rainfall on mature malting barley grain. These are randomized complete block design trials. He does rate winter kill, and I mentioned the nitrogen rate. He's only applying 60 units of nitrogen applied as urea. That urea would be a fine source for us. Just got the 17 results. Yield ranges 12.5 bushels to 46.2 bushels. He does not have the malt quality data presented here, but you can see we've got a wide range of performance. 46 bushel for the McGregor, all the way down to 26 for some of the experimentals. A lot of these names you've probably heard: Thoroughbred, Endeavor, Went Malt, Charles. There's a subset that remains relatively consistent in this variety testing trial. A few of these drop out. I think Endeavor has been dropped out, and I believe Charles has been dropped out. There's been some inconsistent performance in these trials with those 2 varieties. Did note up to 75% winter kill, and we see variation in winter cold resistance with cultivar. I think we can manage a little bit of that again with seeding depth. There's Kirksey's contact information. He's a great resource. He's been running this trial since 2017 and be willing to provide all the data he's got to you. He's running again this year. I mentioned some of these varieties move in and out. Violetta, Charles, Flavia are some of the ones that are in this year. Lots of experimentals from Virginia, Ohio, on down the list. Pixel, Dementia, Constel, and Went Malt, which is a relatively common variety. So, and again, I can get his contact information to you if you have any questions on him running that. I made a short list when I got into it. The first time I tried to do it, Endeavor was the variety that I planted. I did not have success with Endeavor. Again, it winter killed. Had a couple other varieties. We've got a break. We do have quite a few two-row varieties. A lot of these are going to either be bred by USDA out of Idaho, or were actually European varieties that were pulled over. The one that would be a little bit different would be the Virginia Tech Thoroughbred, which is a 6-row. And just a few comments that I've been able to find on it. The malting characteristics on it are not as good as some of the 2-rows out that have had positive results in North Carolina and then in Michigan. This website, T3/Barley, this is actually a repository. So they've been conducting these national winter malting barley trials, I believe, since 2014 in a relatively structured format. All of those trial results are posted online. So if you have any questions on variety performance, this would be a great resource. Memphis, to my knowledge, is the southernmost location of that national variety trial. But we do have an organized effort to develop germplasm that can tolerate our winters here in Tennessee. The last thing I want to mention is I'm here for you. So this has been a developing commodity. I've tried to answer questions as best I can. I've got a few contacts in the industry in other states, and would be more than happy, if you have a specific question that I failed to answer, I'd be more than happy to help you one-on-one. And this is my contact information here. So we've got plenty of time. I'd be more than happy to, if you have any questions or comments, maybe a few of you that had experiences and think some of the things that were presented here, you have some experience that would fine-tune those, be happy to open it up for conversation. Yes, sir.
You didn't talk about barley, the spacing on the seed, on the planting. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So most of the time we're going to plant at 7.5 centimeters. There's a slight yield penalty associated with going to 15 centimeters. Depending on who's done the research, I think the number I saw was 10 to 12% yield reduction if you did choose 15 centimeter row width. If you're not in the organic system, I'm not terribly concerned about weed control. I would be concerned in that 15 centimeter row, you're going to have likely more tillers in that concentrated area, and that could be a little bit more risk for high humidity, high moisture, some of those leaf foliar diseases, maybe some slight differences when you're in the 15 to 7.5. 7.5 will be the way I would prefer it. That allows us to cover the ground most quickly, capture sunlight, but if you've got 15 centimeter planter, you should be just fine. On a population standpoint, 1.2 million seed per acre, it's a little bit lower. If you're thinking 85% germ, you would be around that, 950 mark maybe on total plants. But I want to be a little bit low. I'd rather be a little bit low than I would high on barley, just based on results I've been able to find. Did that answer your question?
Meaning lower density?
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's gonna. Yeah, you would. I think that would pencil out to. I'd have to look it up, but around 35 seed per row foot would be more than enough. Yes, sir.
On the fungicide timing for the head blight on Rhodosace, I believe it's claim to fame is that you can do it a little bit earlier.
That's right.
What about if you're not using Rhodosace, say for sorrow or new Spherex or something like that? Would you still recommend doing it as soon as it comes out, or wait till it gets to 50%?
Honestly, as soon as that spike's emerged, then probably it can. The nice thing about Mirabasace is it does give you that wide protection window, and that's why, in my opinion, it is a must. If you're gonna invest in barley, you're gonna invest in a commodity that we know is going to be more susceptible to some of those diseases during that heading time frame. I would budget for the higher end fungicide, and it's going to cost, but I think it's going to be an expense that's justified. Good question. Yes, sir.
I just want to throw a little more information out there about thoroughbred. You mentioned worse malting characteristics. And so actually, when I started Carolina Malt House, my business model was I'm going to go with thoroughbred, and I'm going to clean out about 25% of it, so that I'm left with just the good plump kernels, and then produce a malt comparable to anything you can get with a 2-row barley. I did that. I produced malt comparable to anything you get with a 2-row barley, high efficiency, low protein, great stuff. But the market just won't take it. All the brewers are going to brewing school, and in brewing school they hear 2-row barley is better than 6-row barley, and then you can never explain to them later on that, oh, well, yes, it's 6-row, but you're getting a comparable product. And it's a shame because the thoroughbred will yield much better than the 2-row varieties. But yeah, I did want to just kind of throw that out there. It's not necessarily worse, and I thought the beer tasted fantastic with the breweries that we got to use it. But ultimately, we did just drop thoroughbred, and because the market just wants 2-row. So
What would you
just
say
thought I'd
would
throw that out there.
be your most common varieties coming through the malt house?
In North Carolina, we're having great luck with Violetta. You mentioned dropping Endeavor. Yeah, I don't mess with Endeavor. You were talking about like growing challenges in this area versus other areas. You need just kind of an overall slower barley. In the cold, dry Midwest, the faster spring varieties work out fine. But that Violetta, actually, from what I understand, it's adapted from a German variety. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, it's a little bit of a slower variety in the malt house, but that gives it a little more storage tolerance, a little bit more tolerance to our weather conditions in the field. So Violet's good. Calypso seems to be doing well. Yeah.
We still use quite a bit of the thoroughbred for a couple of products, and the smaller kernels actually are to a benefit sometimes because you can get a more intense enzyme package, which can lead to flavors sometimes. So we haven't excluded it completely, but it's definitely lower.
But it makes great beer.
I mean, the beers are delicious. Whiskey too. I mean,
Yeah.
One of our beginning products was a malt that we style as Heritage, which is basically it's a tweener. It's in between a Vienna and a Munich, and it makes beautiful whiskey. So we still produce quite a bit of it.
I had a question there in the back.
Well, I don't think that brewers in brewing school say that they're not going to use 6-row because they're told to just use 2-row. It's the main reason why most people are not willing to try 6-row varieties is because the kernel size is so much smaller than everything else that they're using in their brewery, and that can cause problems when you're milling. So you're not going to get if you're crushing everything for a larger size, your efficiency is going to go down on the 6-row, which is trying to provide most of the sugar in your beer. So.
Well, that's exactly right. And what I said was an oversimplification, but they do here in brewing school, well, 6-row has a smaller kernel size, and then even though I'm going in and saying, no, I'm cleaning out the smaller kernels, I'm only giving you the plump ones. That message just wasn't making it through.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean,
But
that's
exactly
the
right.
main reason why. And the other reason is, well, on that, it's really popular with distillers worldwide, just because of the enzyme, just to that gentleman's comments of the enzyme package. Even if you have higher proteins in it, the distillers don't care because they're putting such a huge percentage of adjuncts that don't have alpha amylase in it, that they love the 6-row. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I still think there's, and another thing that if you've got a brewery that has does a lot of mixed fermentations and weird historical beers and stuff like that too, I mean, the distillers are always going to want it. There's a small amount of niche brewers that will use it just because of the same thing with enzymes. But I mean, yeah, it's a kernel size thing. That's the big deal.
And to that, we end up milling a lot of that product prior to it going out. So we'll ask the brewer whatever spec they're needing and then sieve analysis, and we'll try to mill it to that spec.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're also doing some Avalon, which I believe is one of the new Virginia Tech varieties this year. First year year with us, so I don't know much about it. But also, I was going to ask you, have you done anything with any cereal rye? Any thoughts on it or anything about, you know, all we've had so far is basically like Ren's Bruising and stuff like that, you know, meant for
Yeah, right. Yeah.
forage types. And I know a lot of guys in Kentucky are growing the hybrid rice for the distilling industry up there.
So we have a very small acreage in West Tennessee. I've had very limited interaction, plenty of experience with cereal rye from a cover crop standpoint, not from distilling. So I would say I have limited information on that. Definitely couldn't tell you variety performance, but I can find that out for sure. Any other comments or questions? What about from those that are in the room that have some experience growing? What have you seen on seed depth and population? Would the recommendations that you're seeing from these production guides closely mirror what you've had success with?
Probably not, because in our area, where a number of us come, we're no-tilling. So we're no-tilling barley, whether it be behind double crop beans or behind corn. And we have to drop more. If you're no-tilling it, you've got to drop
Sure.
1.6 to 1.8 million, depending on when you're putting it in the ground. So it makes a significant difference. And we do no-till it. I've got one guy that raises some from Malta. It's a little hit and miss, but we get away with it. We've been in the Malta, I've been in the barley and wheat business for a long time, but we have to drop a lot more.
Understood.
Yeah, we're in a similar situation. We no-till everything. We actually follow corn every time. We actually put out more nitrogen than we're recommended to plant later. We're supposed to. We don't do anything right, but we've hit 100 bushels about 4 or 5 years. Same thing with about 1.5 or so in no-till.
How's the protein content been?
We've ranged from 9 to 11.
Excellent.
Putting about 130 units of
Excellent.
nitrogen on that.
We've also been running Palisade with it,
Yes, we
100
do the
pounds,
same thing.
120, 110 to 100. Put Palisade on it. Palisade makes a little difference. Barley's not very good standing up. Certain varieties are terrible at standing up.
Sure.
Yeah, we're also saying Calypso and Violet is all we've ever done. We've sort of moved to stay with Calypso now, just for some standability and a little easier harvesting. But yield-wise, they've been the same. Agronomically, they act about the same. We've not had any, so far we haven't had any winter kill issues to speak of.
So it's a 2-row Calypso? is what
Yes,
it
yeah,
is?
but Calypso and Violet both are 2 rows.
Because we looked at Calypso that was a 6-row, wasn't it?
100, 103, somewhere in there.
Still pretty good.
But just from a farmer's perspective, you talk about growing an acre of barley to burn it to feed, you're gonna have $550 an acre to $600 an acre in an acre of wheat or barley. So that, you start talking about a 50 bushel variety. The caveat to that is if your protein's not right, you get for feed wheat, boy, you screwed the food chair because you've lost about $300 an acre.
And that's a great setup for Dr. Aaron Smith.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you've got to,
Exactly.
obviously you want to have your protein be right, you want to have a premium product. But in the years that, if you go out there and you get a year or 2 in a row and your protein's not right or whatever, you take a beating on it, damn if I'll paint it again. I mean,
Or winter kill, or head blight. Because, you've got, everybody says should provide protection, but it's not a 100% efficacy product. So if the environment's right, you can have,
Spring freeze is your biggest.
Spring freeze.
In winter grain, small grain, spring freeze, that Easter freeze is your worst nemesis. We can make 100 bushels of wheat and barley all day long, as long as we avoid that Easter freeze.
What kind of money are we talking about on a per bushel basis for Baltimore?
that's again, that's going to be, I was charged with presenting the challenges from an agronomic standpoint. And I hope, there's a couple opportunities here from a cost saving standpoint. If we're backing off nitrogen a little bit, if we're backing off seeding rate a little bit, we're going to have to spend some of that on the fungicide. I think we're going to have an increased need for fungicide in barley than we would see in wheat. Just genetically, we've spent more time developing winter wheat varieties that are more resistant to disease than we have barley. So we're gonna, so we got more coming, right? But agronomically, those are some of the challenges. Aaron, I don't want to steal his thunder. Aaron's got some good data on expenses.
You talk about 2 fungicides, you talk about 2 applications of Miravis, or you talk about a flag leaf application of Miravis, or what?
I would think that you're going to need something on that flag leaf. I think you could save a little bit by not putting Miravis twice. That's an expensive application. Definitely going to have Miravis in that heading time frame. I think you could potentially look at something a little cheaper on that flag leaf.